Alrighty, welcome everyone to our event using nonfiction venues to help promote your fiction writing. Our presenter today is Rhonda Jackson Garcia, aka RJ Joseph. She's an award-winning Stoker Award and Shirley Jackson Award nominated Texas-based academic and creative writer, professor, and editor whose writing regularly focuses on the intersections of gender and race in the horror and romance genres and popular culture. She's had works published in various applauded venues, including two fiction anthologies of Black female horror writers, Sycorax's Daughters and Black Magic Women, as well as the 2020 Halloween issue of Southwest Review and the streaming of Hill House essays on the Haunting Netflix series. Rhonda is an instructor at the Speculative Fiction Academy and the co-host of the Genre Black Academia podcast. She's also working with Raw Dog Screaming Press, editing a new novella line, The Selected Papers for the Study of Anomalous Phenomena. So welcome, Rhonda, and I'll go ahead and give you the floor.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much. I'm really excited that you all came in this morning. That's so balmy for a lot of us, but not for our Canadian siblings. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit this morning about using nonfiction venues to promote our fiction writing. Um, and so I'll go ahead and get started. All right. So we are talking about um, being able to promote our writing, being able to promote our work. And one of the ways that I like to do this is by using nonfiction venues. I don't know that it always occurs to us as fiction writers to branch out from other things that we write, and so I think it's always good to kind of think about other places where we could go to talk about what we do. So for this morning, we will first have a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to ask that you do just a little bit of work. This is not therapy, that is not my discipline, but it is important that you know yourself and that you know what you're writing before you can go out and try to get it out into the world. I'm going to ask that you do a little bit of examination of your current circumstances, situations, opportunities, and then we'll wrap up with questions and discussions. Now, Julie and I did talk before the presentation. If you have questions that are happening in real time, then Julie will just kind of chime in and let me know so that we can get those in at the place where they're most relevant. All right, so here we go. It's no secret that writers write. That's what we do, and that many of us want to sell or promote this writing. But selling and promoting can be really, really hard. And thanks for coming to my talk. That's it. Sometimes it feels like that's about how it goes, right? Um, but the thing is, I like to tell people that for me, talking about sales is sort of this nebulous thing that just makes me cringe on the inside. I am luckily pretty extroverted enough when I need to be. I'm one of those introverts that masks as an extrovert. So when I need to talk, when I need to present, when I need to be in conversation, I can do that. But the thing that comes most authentically to me is the talking or the sharing of the stories. Um, that's one thing that makes it hard for us. We don't always want to feel like we're pushing our work down somebody's throat. We don't want to feel like people are tired of hearing us promote our stuff. It can be a little frustrating sometimes, but there are some things we can do to make this a little bit easier, um, or I should say less daunting. It never gets easy. For the purposes of this discussion, I am using nonfiction as Merriam-Webster defines it. This is writing or cinema, or I would even say activities that are more about facts and real events as opposed to the fiction itself. So, whereas we could do a reading of our fiction, that could also be in promotion of that work. When I talk about nonfiction, I'm talking about those things that are more based in fact or real events or something different from the fiction itself. So, you want to really know who you are and what you write. Now, I don't want this to sound condescending, and I don't want this to either become this deep dive into this whole meta idea of who am I, where am I. But it's really important that you understand your situation, circumstances, limitations, willingness, and that of your writing. Before you can even start with all this. So, some of the things you need to think about are what are your personality? Some of us will dissolve into a puddle if we are called on in the moment to do anything. And that's fine, but we need to be aware of that. Others of us love the spotlight. We love to take charge of things. Some of us work better behind the screen for the wizard. You have to know what your personality is and what your willingness is to engage in certain activities because a lot of these venues will require you to do things that might kind of go against that personality. So you want to think about that. You also want to think about what your situation Um, some of these venues can be a little pricey. Is your money funny? Do you have financial obstacles? Are you located in a place where it can be hard to get to different other places from? Do you have any health issues? You have to be really honest about this because if these will be uh, considerations in making your decisions, well, then you do want to have this above board and honest. And honestly upfront in your mind when you think about these venues. And then lastly, we want to think about what we write. And this is one that sometimes stumps newer writers. Because we sometimes want to describe our work as these big, broad, sweeping things, when sometimes we can boil them down to things that are as trite, dare I say, as genre. So you need to know what it is that you're writing. Like I know that I write horror predominantly. I also have written romance. I do a lot of academic writing, quite a bit of nonfiction writing. Um, and so I understand that in those kinds of writings, there are lots of parallels. So, for instance, I, who first of all am a proud part of Romance Landia, would never turn my nose down at the opportunity to talk about horror, romantic elements in horror, if that were a panel at one of my romance siblings conferences, because I understand that romance and horror are siblings in that they both sprang from Gothic writing, and so they're very, very similar in that way. Um, in the same vein, I understand that horror is under the broader umbrella of speculative fiction. So I would never turn up my nose at the chance to share discussion space with let's say a fantasy or a sci-fi writer, because we're all writing things that are very, very similar. Now, in opposition, we also have to understand what it is that we don't write. Right. And I know that this might sound counterintuitive, but I'm not asking here that you take your horror novel and shoehorn it into a presentation about uh, uh, medieval studies if it has nothing to do with that. Now, there are salespeople who are true salespeople who will say to you, get the sale, do it any way you can. I am not comfortable with that. I'm talking about these logical connections that you can make and would feel comfortable about pursuing, if that kind of makes sense. So, for just a moment, I'd like for you to think about your different community roles. So, think about the hobbies that you engage in. I know some of you are like, I write, I don't have time for anything else except my day job. But all of us don't have day jobs that relate to our writing. Some of us are parents, we have parenting activities, we have other family activities. We may attend church regularly. We may teach beanbag tossing classes. And then I want you to really think too about your story topics. What do you write about? Think about those rabbit holes that we go down with in research all the time, where we are writing one scene about one cemetery. And before we know it, we've spent a week examining the old English burial methods, right? A lot of us writers are sort of mini experts on on various topics. So, just for a moment, kind of think about those things that you have delved into, those things you spend time doing, the things that you like doing, and I promise you that there are opportunities there that you may not have previously considered. So, for example, I am an English professor. I am the stereotype. I teach in the English department. I have an MFA, so this is what I do. I teach writing, literature, creative writing, composition, all this stuff. But on campus, I'm the resident spooky girl. So whenever anything about horror or monsters or anything comes up, I'm usually the one that people want to come to. Not that there aren't other spooky girls there, but I'm very visible. Like I have, spiders and zombies and skulls. They're all in my office and on my hallway door. So I'm often called on to judge Halloween contests on campus. One of my favorite things that the library sponsors most years is a short story writing contest, like two sentence horror or something like that. I'm typically called on to judge those contests. I've also been asked to participate in judging like the jack o' lantern art contest, which is really cool. So I'm kind of Halloween girl. I have been invited to different classrooms to talk about horror and to talk about writing. And as you can imagine, it gives me a lot of fodder to talk about in my own classroom because I can talk to students about the fact that writing is a real thing. It's a real job. It is a valuable skill to have. Recently, this past semester, I was invited to speak to the writing club when they were talking about approaching horror and speculative fiction. So I was able to tie that love of my horror to the love of writing with other writers. And boy, when I say that club came up with one of the best prompts for us to write about that day, that where I think I'm going to mine it for some story fodder for myself in the future. I've also been invited to speak at the death conference that we have on campus for a death class, which is an honors course which pairs philosophy with the history of death. And they've put on their second death conference this past year. And I was requested to come and talk a little bit about the undead. Which is, one of my very, very favorite topics. So think about those things that you do at work. Our day jobs don't always coincide so stereotypically as mine do, but you might be, let's say, a baker, and you feature characters in your works. Maybe you have a baker who solves mysteries. Think about that when there are times that come up when you're talking to your customers, if this is allowed at your job, or you're talking to your owner of your boss, your manager, or if you're the owner yourself. Think about how nicely the fact that you write about this topic and also work doing these things could kind of fit in together. Another thing that I like to do is ask writers to think about social media as nonfiction writing. Now, I know that a lot of us go to social media to be social, and that's fair. It's right there in the name. But when I teach my students, we use social media as nonfiction writing. This is a screenshot from a recent post that I made when we were in at StokerCon in San Diego the past weekend. And the reason why this is relevant is because if you go to my feed on this social media platform, you will see a lot of random stuff. But one thing that that is very really funny in my horror writing community, those that I'm close with, is how I write all this very gruesome stuff, but I'm terrified, like utterly terrified of wildlife. Like I love looking at animals, and I really like, being around them, the sounds and things like that, but I'm terrified. So we're here looking at the seals and the sea lions, and my writer friends are like, "Hey, we got to go dip our foot in this water." And I'm thinking, first of all, it's like 60 degrees. I love that coolness, but you're doing a lot. There's sand there, and then there's like there are the seals, and oh my gosh, even worse than that, there are the birds. So this look that you see on my face in the picture is very genuine. That is the whole, oh my gosh, the birds are going to get us kind of thing. And so this is a very silly, I admit it, way to engage, but it's very true. It is true that I am a pretty decent horror writer, but it's also true that I'm terrified of stuff. I think that that's what helps me to tap in to this fear so well about different things. For Valentine's Day, I mean, again, I am a romance writer as well. I just haven't written romance in quite a bit. I do hope to get back to it at some point. But for a horror writer, Valentine's Day is talking about gruesome love, right? As one does. So for Valentine's Day last year, I made a post with one of the illustrations from my short story collection. I worked with this brilliant artist, William Scarrett, on making illustrations for each one of the stories, and one of them has heavy romantic elements. Quite a few of them do. I mean, of course, again, we talked about this relationship between horror and romance, and the story is of is horror. I would never ever tell anybody it's a romance, but it has romantic elements. And for me, it is the epitome of the eternal love. And so I posted one of the illustrations. Again, this is fact based writing. This is an illustration that I commissioned for my story. It does represent the love in that story. But anyone who comes across this post on Valentine's Day and is interested in why this tree has eyes, why this lady is impaled on the tree, they might be compelled to kind of think, well, what is this book that she's talking about? This might be something that I need to think about. Um, Further exploring social media. Okay, I met a fellow writer on this same social media platform. Who goes by Axofolio PhD. This writer I started following because she is a medievalist. She always posts these tidbits about medieval history, and I'm just fascinated by her posts. Well, as it turns out, she's not only a medievalist, but she is a brilliant yarn work person. So she crochets, she knits, and she creates these beautiful, beautiful yarn colorways that are based on the colors in medieval pictures. So I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a budding, well, I probably will never like actually finish anything I crochet besides pot holders and pillows. But I try really hard. And so I say to myself, I'm going to go see what Dr. MRO is doing over on her yarn site. Like she'll post these colors, and I go, oh, well, when I get better at this crocheting thing, I'm going to order some yarn from her. Well, going to this yarn site and looking at her posts on social media brought me to the book that is on my table in my office that I am dying to read. But of course, as a writer, I'm always slow on having a lot of reading time. But she did a translation and critical study of John the Baptist prayer. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how wonderful. So this nonfiction writing that she did about on social media about medieval pictures, about yarn and colorways. And she also has like a YouTube channel where she shows how to create these things. This created an authentic connection for me with Dr. MRO. I've never met her in person. If I ever saw her, I probably would not know her if she was not carrying any of this yarn with her. But this is a way that she has not only gotten me interested in her writing and her academic work, but also in her hobbies and the beautiful work that she does with dyeing her yarns. So think about we talked about related job activities. Think about things that you might be able to volunteer for on your campus. If you are a romance writer, I know that our campus library does like a date, have a blind date with a book activity. Um, so it would be possible for me to ask if they needed help. And this is just kind of a pro tip. Most people do need help. They will accept your help if you give it genuinely and authentically. And if you don't come off as, I just want you to put my book here in this thing. We also have at work a little free library. And so whenever I have books that I can part with, because I'm a terrible book hoarder, I will put books in the little free library. I have put a couple of copies of my own horror collection there so that people who, may not have been inclined to buy it before would be able to take a look at it to see if it's something they like. And then they can trade it out for a different book that somebody else could read. These activities extend to your community. If you are, let's say, a a fantasy writer, and let's say you have, I hate to be cliche, but you have a Renaissance Fest, in your town. This is a community event where they might be looking for speakers, representatives, volunteers. Think about the things that you do and do well and that you enjoy doing. I know for some of us that can be difficult because it sounds like it's tooting our own horn. But this is a case where you absolutely want to do that. Believe it or not, people want to read our stuff. They want to read our work. They just need to know that it's there. You also might want to think about attaching your book topics to community events. Um, as a Texan horror writer, there are quite a few things that happen, of course, that we're talking about community events. Whenever hurricane season is here, like, those of us here, when we're 9 days in. And so you'll probably see me talking about reading, writing out the storm with good books, understanding that whatever's in the book is made up. It's not nearly as real life as this hurricane, which is kind of dire now that I think about it, to tie it to that kind of an event. But I hope that even with that gruesome analogy, that we can kind of see where I'm going with that. The community has lots of things that are happening. Sometimes there are hay rides, sometimes there are auctions, and there are groups that are looking for items to be donated. Sometimes these items will get like a blurb. So let's say that my kids are all out of school now, but let's say that I wrote a children's book and the school is looking for auction items. Of course, going through all the red tape you might have to go through, you may be able to offer your book as an item. And then a lot of times, sponsors of these things are given taglines. And so that would be a little blurb that talks about you, your work, what you do, and people may also be inclined to follow up with that. So you also want to think about who else might be interested in you and your work. Of course, as an academic, I do present at a lot of academic conferences, but I don't know that all writers realize that there may be academic conferences that cover topics that you write about. For instance, I am involved in the academic track planning programming at Multiverse Convention. It happens in Atlanta for the past 6 years now, in October. And it is a fandom convention. Well, our academic presentations are probably not like any that you would see anywhere else. We have presentations such as last year we had a sociology professor who completely gamified his intro to sociology course, and he came and gave us a showing of that game. It was the coolest virtual reality thing that I'd ever seen. And this was at a speculative fiction conference, right, on an academic track. We've had speakers come in and talk about how K I'm sorry, Korean soap operas can help you with developing your story. We have had academic presentations on things like the anatomy of a dragon, and our presenter is a brilliant researcher, and then she's never like built a dragon or grown a dragon, but she presented to us, well, if they existed, this is how they would have to go. So look at sometimes these places that do academic presentations. Other places you might not think of as film festivals. um, I've often presented at film festivals that either focus on femininity or focus on horror. Um, and so this is essay work or nonfiction work where I'm talking about the things that I've learned. We talk about those research rabbit holes that we fall into sometimes. Other conference appearances. Sometimes conferences, well, all the time, conferences are looking for people to not just be on programming, but sometimes they're looking for volunteers. Um, they're always looking for volunteers. Like, this is as someone who's involved in helping plan cons. Um, and so you may find that there is a local conference that happens where you can lend your hand, and you will inevitably get, you, of course, you usually have a name badge. You may have other information that's about you. And this is where there will be links that talk about this is what other kind of work that you do. Um, Another one that I don't know if people think about a lot, although it does come with kind of this double-edged sword, is book and movie reviews. Um, there are some writers who will tell you stay away from reviewing other writers' books. Uh, I'm not going to say that. What I will say is that you want to be really careful about how you're presenting yourself as a reviewer. Like, there are people who are book reviewers and that's what they do. They don't write, they only review books, and they're doing us a great service for which most of them are not paid. So we don't want to try to bump them out of the arena. We also don't want to, I don't want you all to think of this as me saying that book reviewers don't know what they're talking about. I'm actually approaching this from the idea that to be a good writer, you must be a good reader. I mentioned my to be read stack earlier. It's more like a mountain, but I'm sure many of you can relate to that. We are big readers. And if we read a book that blows us away, that writer will be so appreciative if we wrote a review about that book. It's really hard to get reviews because they take time, like, and people are busy. But if you read something that is just amazing and you really think everybody else needs to read it, think about posting a review on Goodreads or on Amazon, or on a blog post about the book. Now, this is also not me saying that you must sugarcoat what you're saying. This is not me saying that you got to play nice. But just think about your space that you're creating in that arena, and whether or not you want to be known as that writer that trashes other people's books and then expects people not to trash their own. I mean, it's just kind of one of those things to think about. Movie reviews are another thing that you can do. I am often writing guest blog posts, or even critical essays about movies and different aspects. If you go to the movies all the time in your downtime, think about writing those reviews up. People want to know what you think. Sometimes they want to know what you think because they see that you're an expert movie watcher. Other times they want to know what you think because they are fellow creators and they would like to know how they can make their own work. They can improve their own work as well. Like, one of the things that helps me with writing my screenplays is when I talk to people about movies that they watch and they go, "Yeah, I really wish that they'd done more of this instead of that," and I kind of go, "Okay, noted." So these are things that sometimes take some digging to find. How to do how to get into the venues, but people are always looking for kind words, volunteerism, and expert knowledge. Um, And I'm sorry, we talked about this. One thing that I didn't mention on this previous slide, though, is that when you engage in your community like this, you're making additional connections with like minds. So you're meeting other creators. I've done craft shows. I'm here kind of in the suburbs of Houston. And so I've done craft shows where I have books, but other people have maybe other crafts, wreaths and yard signs and coffees and homebrew teas and things like that. But we're all creators, and sometimes I find that in talking to them in these authentic conversations about our work and what our goals are, what we're trying to do, that I can sometimes get ideas from them, as well as them from me. So that connection can kind of help you um, to get to open up other venues to talk more about your work. Um, so think about what you want to talk about. I mentioned film festivals, guest blog posts, and podcast visits are really, really cool. Sometimes, if the podcast is a big one, it can be kind of hard to get a space with them. But for the most part, they have scheduling, contact apps, and most podcasts are not going to have you reading your own work necessarily, but they will have you discussing it. So this is a way that you can delve into what you're writing about. I do suggest making sure that you listen to the podcast first. Make sure it's a good fit, somewhere that you would want to actually be and talk and engage on. Um, Same with guest blog posts. Bloggers are always looking for content. They always want fresh ideas. Sometimes you can reach out to someone who takes guest blog posts. They may mention on social media, hey, I'm looking for guest posts about freedom for my July posts. And so you can reach out to them. Another way that you can sort of talk about your writing is through workshops, kind of like this one, uh, where you talk about things that you've done, things that you know, talk about certain parts of your expertise. And lots of times during these workshops, people will think, okay, well, that sounds reasonable to me. What else does this person do? And they may be willing to engage in your work that way. Some of the places that I've done reviews or guest blog posts for was Dread Central, and Afro Horror Blog, which are horror blog magazine type places. Speculative Chick has stopped posting new content, but I have a lot of guest posts there. I've done posts for Dark Dispatch magazine, another horror um, uh, venue, horror addicts. I have been known to post an Amazon review or two. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I have done it before. I've been to various fellow author blogs to guest posts for them. And then sometimes I get the honor of blurbing someone's book. And some newer writers think, well, nobody's going to ask me for a blurb. Well, sometimes you can ask to provide words for someone else's book. You would be surprised at how daunting it can be to ask for these things. So the best way to get started with this is to just start doing it. Um, as a la Walt Disney says. I thank you all for coming this morning and letting me ramble about this nonfiction type things. I appreciate your patience with my non-tech abilities, and I really enjoyed chatting with you. So if you want to talk more about these things, you can feel free to email me. I usually haunt most of the social media platforms from behind at R Jackson Joseph. And I do have a website where you can kind of keep up with taking a look at what we're doing. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen here, come out of this whole tech mode, and come back to the land of the living. Does anyone have any questions or any concerns? Anything you want to discuss?
I can start. That was so insightful. I'd never thought of doing all of those things as a way to promote. I especially
Oh,
love
thank you.
the I especially love the judging the jack-o'-lantern contest. Um,
Yeah.
have there been any other kind of non-traditional venues that have surprised you with how welcoming they were to you?
um, well, so surprising in the way that just the way my grown-up mind thinks. I think like I grew up in I grew up Southern Baptist here in Texas, and so I never thought about how welcoming a lot of activities in the Black community are held still in churches, and it floors me when I go to a book festival that's held at a church, and I have my Black candles and I have my creepy stories, because once I'm there, I mean, I'm just one of the crew. I'm just the writer, but that whole community has been, and there are lots of Black people who go, yeah, I'm not going to read that, but I'll buy it and I'll just give it to somebody else. So that has been a little bit surprising to me, that horror, speculative fiction as a whole. I mean, although it's not surprising, again, my critical brain says, well, of course they go together, but yeah, my child brain is like, oh, I brought the monster into the church house.
That's awesome. I love that juxtaposition. Uh,
You're right.
a related question from Stephanie. What has been your favorite venue or event so far?
Um, Gosh, I love I love nerding out with other people. I think that my favorite event so far has been I visited a bookstore to discuss my book in Tulsa called Witty Books. And it just so happened to be over my birthday weekend. I didn't have any intention of telling anybody that it was my birthday coming up, right? But it's like on social media, right? But uh, I walked into this place and it felt like sitting in somebody's living room. They have like this eclectic collection of couches and chairs and little doodads, and like in the back of the store there's like this sewing craft setup thing, and it just really felt like home. And when they asked me what I thought about the setup, at first they had like this chair sitting in front and then the other stuff kind of in rows, and I go, well, really, could we just like sit in a circle and like talk about spooky stuff? And they were like, yeah, we could do that, and that was the best time. And also, I got a huge piece of tres leches birthday cake. So that was really wonderful.
Oh, can't beat Tres Leches. Mm.
Yes, right, just the best.
Got a question from Charlie saying, it can be
Mhm.
hard for me to find conventions and meetups regarding the genres I'm interested in. WriteHive is my first convention related to literary publishing. Welcome. Do you have any good resources for where to find these types of communities and conventions?
Oh, sure. So first off, the genres you're interested in, make sure that you are hanging out with people that write in those genres. And when I say hang out, I mean like online. Again, if you look at my social media feeds, they are full of people who write horror, romance, and academic stuff, speculative fiction. These are the things that I am intensely involved in and interested in. Also, WriteHive is amazing. They are totally online. There are other conventions that have online components, so you might want to check those out. For instance, StokerCon is the annual horror genre convention, and even though it physically changes location every year, there have been in recent years, ever since the recent unpleasantness of 4 years ago, there has been a virtual component also, so people are able to engage in these StokerCon activities virtually. So I would look for things like that. I would writers that you like in the genre who you read, because again, we should be reading in the genres that we're wanting to write in. Look and see where they say they're going to go. Read their newsletters. Sometimes they'll say, like I have been in bed with con crud this whole week, but usually I'd have been on social media saying, hey, I'm going to be at WriteHive, I'm going to be doing this, or hey, y'all come hang out at this con or come do that. So word of mouth is really, really good. Every now and again, you can do searches for things like calls for proposals. You can, just do basic searches for online conventions and conferences. I mean, it's kind of hit or miss, especially nowadays. So I think that the biggest way that I would say is to immerse yourself in the community with other writers of those genres.
We'll keep an eye on Discord. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask them in Discord and we can pass them along to Rhonda. Thank you so much for your presentation. Like I said, that was really great.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.